What a privilege it is to introduce a woman that most people in the room already know. As a true pioneer in sports broadcasting, blazing a trail from the New York Yankees to the New York State Broadcasters Hall of Fame. Let's give Suzyn a rousing Binghamton Bearcat welcome. Woo-hoo.
You're fabulous. My goodness, you're fabulous. Kate, I'm really sorry. You do know that Jimmy Garoppolo is a Patriot, so if they win, it goes on our record. Okay, it'll be 7 for us. I am a Bostonian and I am a Patriot fan, a real one since 1960 with the old logo. This is so fabulous. This is so great. And I actually was telling some other people, I never thought I'd see the day that this kind of event could actually take place. And so I want you all to congratulate yourselves. Give yourselves a little round of applause here, too. But before we can look forward, I want to take you back a little bit. There's a musical, and it's called Hairspray. And if you didn't see the play, rent the movie. Because Queen Latifah sings a song as she's marching with a group of young kids. They're going to integrate something. And she sings a song called I Know Where I've Been. And you can't go forward until you know where other people have been. I didn't come to New York to be in sports. I grew up in Boston. My grandfather took me to Fenway Park when I was 3. I had my own season ticket. I could literally reach out and touch Ted Williams. I would go and, stick my head in the little dugout because I was a little cutie back then. And no one was at the games. I knew Ted Williams when I was 4. His best friend was a guy named Johnny Pesky. I called him Uncle Johnny till the day he died. My dad took me to Celtics games. I learned basketball listening to Red Auerbach coach a team that won 10 out of 11 championships. No one was there. Red yelled. I learned how to coach basketball and what basketball was about from Red Auerbach coaching Bob Cousy, Bill Sharman, Bill Russell, Tommy Heinsohn, and Frank Ramsey, and later John Havlicek. Now, if any of you younger people don't know these names, I don't mind if you take your phones out and Google, because you should know who these people are. So it never occurred to me to go into sports. There wasn't any. I never saw a woman. I never saw a woman on television. I went. I knew sports. My mother knew sports. My aunts knew sports. I'd sit in Fenway Park and Cardinal Cushing would bring the nuns and they knew sports. Sister Agnes taught me how to score when I was 4. And then she told me to stay inside the lines. I never stayed inside the lines, ever, in anything. So I left and I was going to be in theater. And I could sing and I could dance and I could act. And I did. I went to New York and I was in theater. But baseball, I can still remember the day when my grandfather took me out of that little tunnel and out into the sunshine. And I was 3 or 4. And there's this little green jewelry box, Fenway Park. And we sat in the front row. And it was something I can still see it every now and then. I'll take a young guy around. First one I ever did was Ricky Henderson. He said, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "Come here. I'm going to take you where I sat. Now pretend you're 4. And there was something very musical about baseball and about sports. But you didn't think about it. So I had my career on Broadway. I did. I worked for 15 years. I wasn't famous, but I worked. That was okay. I bought my house with Manna La Mancha. And when I got a little older, the music was changing, and the Broadway I came to New York to do was gone. It wasn't coming back. What else can I do? I don't know. Ken Coleman, the late Ken Coleman, who was the voice of the Boston Red Sox, said, I know this friend of mine. They're putting together something, and they're going to start an all-sports station in New York City. I said, okay. He said, he's going to meet you. Because I always talked sports. I always wrote about sports. When I was on the road, I would go to other people's baseball games. I sang the national anthem for free. Back in the 70s, nobody realized it was a way to get on television. So I would go. I wanted to go to the ball game. And so on matinee days, if I didn't do matinees, and I never did, I would go to wherever I was. I was in Pittsburgh in 1979 when the We Are Family team was so big. I sang the national anthem in the playoffs and in the World Series, and that's when my life actually changed. I was standing there, and I was talking to some people, and Joe Garagiola had said to me, he had met me in another place when I was singing, and he said, just think about doing this for a living. Someone else had said it to me before. And I said, okay, fine. And I'm still in theater. And this went on for a while. So when Ken Coleman said, you got to meet this guy, I did. He said, go get a tape. Oh, sure, I can do that. I can do that. You'll learn this. You'll say you can do it. If somebody asked me to roller skate, I would say, I can do it. Whatever you want me to do, I will do. I made myself a tape, and I put it on the guy's desk, and they hired me to do updates in WFAN. I was the first voice on the air, as you heard. I was hired to work opposite a guy named Pete Franklin, who wasn't there because he'd had a heart attack, whatever. So the first voice on the air says, good evening, we're starting something, good afternoon, we're starting something special here. I do 2 updates, and I hear the owner of the station outside the door say, get that smart aleck broad with the Boston accent off of my air in prime time. And Jim Lampley was doing the show with me, and he said, just keep going. Well, I really wasn't very good at updates. I can talk, but I can't read really well things. And back then, no computers, nothing. You got a ticker, you ripped it off, you wrote it down on those green and white word processor things, and if you made a mistake, you made a mistake. They couldn't fire me because they would have had to pay me off. So they moved me to overnights, midnight to 6, thinking I'd quit. I did not. This went on for a while, and I said, you know what? I went to the program director, and I said, we've hired newspaper people to do what we should be doing ourselves, where they'd have like a guy from the Daily News talk about the Yankee game. And I said, this I know you don't know. I went to the program director, and I said, give me a tape recorder. Let me go to the games, and let me be a reporter with a tape recorder. That's how the electronic beat writer that you see all the time, that was me. Because I knew I was going to be fired, and I didn't want to do overnights the rest of my life. He said, well, we're not paying you. I said, just give me a tape recorder. I drove everywhere. I went to, you know why I got the Yankees? Because the Mets had won the World Series the year before, and the guys wanted to go to Shea, and nobody wanted to go to Yankee Stadium. So I said, I'll go. I went to do all 3 hockey teams. I did the Devils. Nobody wanted to go to New Jersey. That was the year the Devils ended up in the playoffs against the Bruins. I was the only one who knew the team, so they had to send me. I was telling some guys before, I got the Knicks. I was covering the Knicks because none of the guys would drive to Westchester. I live in Westchester, and they didn't know about this new coach. I think his name was Pitino or something. So I went, I said, I've known Rick Pitino since he had the kids at Boston University running up and down the court with bricks in their hands because they were elitist little spoiled kids and they needed discipline. So I knew he was going to do great stuff for the Knicks. So that's where I started doing that. Okay. When I got to Yankee Stadium for the first time, the problem is usually not with players. There's a few. I sat in that press box for a solid season and nobody talked to me. The newspaper guys didn't talk to me because, 1, I was female, and 2, I was electronic, and they saw something coming. They saw the end of what they did. I could get a scoop and put it on the air at 2 o'clock in the morning. They couldn't. So it was really lonely and very, very tough. What you find if you're a female in sports, there's a lot of kindness and a lot of horrible things that happen to you and nothing in between. My first thing that happened was in 87. In those days, you didn't know the players, really. So I would take my media guide. For example, the Toronto Blue Jays were a notoriously tough clubhouse. And I looked to see who I could talk to in your room there. And I said, okay, there's Jeff Musselman. He went to Harvard. He's not going to be mean to me. Oh, there's John Cerruti. He went to Amherst. He's not going to yell at me. So I'm talking to them. And George Bell, remember George Bell? Okay, George Bell, left fielder for the Toronto Blue Jays. He was mad at the New York writers because Don Mattingly had won the MVP the year before, so he didn't talk to anybody all year. This is September, and George decided he was going to talk to the writers. Saw me, started screaming in Spanish and English, get her out of here, I'm not talking to anybody, and the room went totally quiet. Now, this is my first year, and I'm thinking, just let me get out of here before I start to cry. And I'm backing up, and it's like a movie. I mean, nobody's moving, nobody's talking, and he's screaming and yelling, and, of course, Albert Schweitzer, they all needed to talk to George Bell. And I'm almost at the door, and I hear somebody say, what's her name? And one of the writers said, oh, Suzyn something. And I hear Suzyn, and I turn around, and it was Jesse Barfield, who was the right fielder for the team. And he said, I went 3 for 4 today. Don't you want to talk to me? And that story is in a chapter in a children's book. Imagine my delight when he was traded to the Yankees in 1989. Yeah. But we're friends to this day. Dave Winfield did a really kind thing for me. The other tape recorder people didn't like me because they thought I was taking a job away from one of their friends. I was very nervous about talking and asking questions. But Dave Winfield had been in a terrible slump, and it was because both Rickey Henderson and Willie Randolph were not in the lineup. And they came back, and he went 3 for 5, and I had it all written down, and I was going to do this great thing about what happened, and I started to give out some stats, and I made a mistake. And I'm thinking, oh my God, do I stop and show everybody that I made a mistake, or do I keep going and not be able to use the tape? As I'm thinking what to do, Dave Winfield stops the tape and said, I don't like how I answered the question you asked me before. Can we start again? It was out of nowhere. It was so kind. That's the first year. I got a little stronger the next year. I was in the Kansas City locker room, and I was talking to a guy named Mark Gubicza, who was going to be a free agent, and he had pitched a one-hitter against the Yankees. And I'm talking to him, and I hear these horrible noises behind me and terrible things going on. And he said, oh, I'm sorry. I kept going, and he said, don't worry about it. And I walked out, and there was the infielders corner, and they were over there. And the first one I saw was a guy named Brad Wellman. And I said, hey, Brad. And he said, what? And I said, if you had spent more time worrying about your baseball and less time on harassing women, you wouldn't have spent 10 years in the minor leagues. And that really was the last time. Yeah, so you learn a lot in a year. This was a very tough business back then. I would get, excuse me if you're too young to understand this, I would get used condoms in the mail. I would get feces in the mail. I had death threats the whole year of 1989. George Steinbrenner I had my own police force. I never knew who they were, but they were always there. I was never alone from the time I hit the parking lot until the time I got in my car. If my car was started for me, that meant that another bomb threat had been called into Yankee Stadium. Amazing. Somebody actually wanted to kill me because I was talking about the Yankees and the Knicks on the radio. That's what it was like back there. I was very lucky in one thing about being in the right place at the right time. When you covered the Yankees back in the 80s, the owner of the team was around all the time. And if it weren't for George Steinbrenner, I would have none of this at all. George Steinbrenner liked to push barriers. He liked to do all kinds of things. And in 87 and 88, you ran after him. And you needed to talk to him because everybody needed to talk to George. And he'd get to the elevator. You weren't allowed to get into the elevator if George was getting into the elevator. So he would get in the elevator, and I would run up the stairwells, the ramps at Yankee Stadium. And if I beat him to the office, he would talk to me. And we did this over and over again. I mean, it went on for 2 years. And 1 year, and it was great. And he called me Waldman, and I said, Mr. Steinbrenner, can we do this? And one winter, between 88 and 89, he used to take the beat writers to lunch, and he was taking them to 21. And I wasn't invited. And I called the PR guy. Nah, he doesn't want girls there. I said, well, but I'm a beat writer. No, you're not. You're not a guy. You can't come. So I went to WFAN, and I said, would you please tell me how much my 5 o'clock spot sells for? 5:05. How much does my spot sell for? How many people listen? So I wrote a letter because, dear Mr. Steinbrenner, this is what my spot sells for at 5:05. And by the way, more people listen to me at 5 o'clock every afternoon than read every paper in the tri-state area. I'm coming down to Tampa. I demand an interview with you. And I put it in the mail, FedExed it, went down to Tampa. I didn't tell him I was going to a spa, but he didn't need to know that. I get to the hotel, and there's a blinker, and his secretary's on the phone. Susan, this is Joanne. Mr. Steinbrenner will see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. I said, okay. She said, and by the way, I have Xeroxed that letter. Do you know what a Xerox is? Okay. I've Xeroxed that letter, and I've given it to every woman in the building. So I get there, And I'm sitting in George's office with my little tape recorder, and in comes George. Waldman, let me tell you something. I don't like women cops. I don't like women firefighters. I don't like women in the Army. I don't like women in sports. I like women who look pretty and spend my money. And I said, okay, I can do that. Now, let's talk about the pitching staff. And he started to laugh. And George decided that he was going to be the person to put a woman on the air. And not too long after that, he had said, Waldman, one of these days I'm going to make a statement about women in sports. You're it. I hope you can take it. This is before the death threats. This is still while people weren't talking to me. The worst of it is never players. It's the people you work with who don't think you belong there. There's not an 18-year-old intern to this day who doesn't think he knows more than I do. He doesn't, but he thinks he does. And that's something that you guys maybe are never going to know. So why am I telling you this? There's somebody sitting there saying, okay, boomer, let's get on with it. We've got it from here. I'm telling you that because we've made strides, but not enough. I'm still the only female broadcaster in baseball that does it every day. Jessica Mendoza once a week, ESPN. I'm still the only one. This is my 34th year, my 16th with John, and there's still just me. There are more women in sports broadcasting, but they're typecast. One day, a sideline reporter won't need to be young and blonde and beautiful, and if she is, they won't move her out at the age of 35. We haven't gone past that yet. There's a lot more women. I don't want all of you to be boxed into something that you shouldn't be. We're not the same. One of the things that always used to happen, and I was thinking about this a lot, when I started at FAN, when you worked anywhere, there was, the guy who did the talk show, the funny guy, the play-by-play guy. Everybody was male, and there was the woman. We're not the same. If you saw another woman walk in the door, one of you was not going to be there. That went on for years. I want that to stop too, and you guys are the ones who are going to have to do that. What you've learned in sports here is you can take that because you're not always going to have your teammates. You're not always going to be playing basketball. You're not always going to be playing lacrosse. But everything that I see here, the smiles on people's faces and the things that you've learned here, you can take. You've learned to push yourself past what you think you can do. Use that. Whatever it is you're going to do. You want to be a nurse practitioner, you're going to be afraid. You're going to say, I can't do this. Something's going to happen. Do it anyway. And think of those days. And that smile you gave for your teammates, save it for them. Remember what that means. The faith that your teammates have in you, that's something we never had. Never had women support systems. We were pitted against each other. That's something that this society has got to get away from and is getting away from. Draw on the strength that, how your teammate would say to you, you can do this, you got this, and you're afraid and you can't do it. Do it anyway. I'm afraid of everything. Absolutely everything. I do it anyway. Most people do. The other thing that you guys are going to have that I didn't have, I was just thinking something really odd. When I was talking about pitting against each other, they were pitted against it. Maybe that's what they wanted all along. Maybe there were people out there that are kind of afraid of women that are together. Look what's happened in Congress. Just think about that. Don't ever let that happen again. One of the great things that has happened this year at the end of the playoff series when the Yankees lost to Houston, I don't know if you remember, there was a young woman who reported on a terrible event in the clubhouse. The ex-GM accused her of lying and making up the story. 20 years ago, she would have been fired by Sports Illustrated, and that would have been the end of it. But because there were other women in that clubhouse, that's why that guy got fired. It was other women who had one of the things I see about this younger generation is you're not afraid. You don't back down from people. That is really important. And this kind of event is so wonderful, but take whatever got you to the basketball court. When I started playing basketball, we were talking about it. There was 6 people on a team. We were not allowed to dribble past half court. I don't know. They thought we'd have the vapors or something. I'm not quite sure. I did 8 shows a week for 15 years and I never passed out once. But that was back then. It's really changed. I got like 1,000 stories, and I can't do that because I know you guys are on a time limit. But one of the things that you've got, I think if there's something that I want to leave you with, whatever you've learned from having this sports support system, take it and use it. I don't care what you do. I don't care if you want to teach. I don't care if you want to run for Congress. Whatever you do, take this, because I was looking at the smiles of the athletes that are on there. You guys are not afraid. And if you are, you can think of those smiles to get you through whatever it is, because, you know, it's tough. We're not there. There's more, and this is great. We're not there. I've been doing this 34 years. I don't have time to wait for another 34 years. So if I could leave you with anything, it's just I am really so proud of this. And I'm so proud of all of you and what you've done. And there's so much you can learn. So remember that I said this in 5 years. When somebody fires you or says, you know, girls can't do this, remember what you learned here. Remember that support system, because that's really all we've got is each other. That's something that I never had, and I see women nodding here. And anyone who's in my generation, we never had that, ever. I had a mother who pushed me too. My grandfather said I was a princess. There was nothing I could do, and my mother said couldn't do, and my mother said, yeah, that's fine. You can do more. So whenever that is, I think of that. You guys think of each other, because that's what you have. Thank you all so much for inviting me. I hope this continues forever. Thank you.